It's interesting when there's a token involved, it changes a lot the dynamics of how people get involved, because all of a sudden there's some symbol associated with a protocol and organization beyond just the products.
Sure.
And many mix up as if the governance token is itself the product and the core protocol, but they obviously function independently of each other. And one is a governance token that's intended to help guide operations and progress of the protocol. But we have been experimenting with our operating models for how to involve decentralized stakeholders in the best way. I think the DAO phenomenon as a way to organize people is one which is still trying to find its true and most efficient shape.
Sure.
And if you look at like corporate governance, where you have shareholders, boards, executive organs, and their various working groups throughout the company have had hundreds of years of evolution and trial and error, finding out what works and what works less. And there are some pretty well-established practices across most jurisdictions for what works. DAOs have been around for 4 years, depending on how you count it. So it hasn't gone through as many iterations. Of course, everything moves much faster in today's day and age than it did for probably corporate governance evolution. And we can also learn, I think, from probably even more than we're doing today of how corporate governance works, because it is in the zeitgeist that people are now picking up work more at their own conditions.
Welcome to Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel, where we explore projects in decentralized finance that are innovating and driving our mission of financial freedom forward. Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review Mission DeFi and spread the word by posting a tweet to the show. All opinions expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests are their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Black Knox, Material Indicators, or any other affiliated organizations. You should not treat any opinion expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests as an inducement to make a particular investment, follow a particular strategy, or become involved with any project. A project being featured on the show is not an endorsement of that project in any way. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Now, here's Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel.
All right, I'm excited today to have Hannes Graah joining me from Gro Protocol. And Gro Protocol is a leveraged yield and deposit protection platform. And Hannes is going to tell us all about it. But first, Hannes, if you could introduce yourself, tell us your background, how you ended up on this space, And I'd love to hear a little bit more about the fact that you hopped all over the world and what that experience has been like and how it's added to what you're doing.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Brad, and letting us tell a bit about our story, and I'll also make a short side turn on my own story. So my name is Hannes indeed. My paths of DeFi, crypto, and my normal day job have been going side by side for a while. It's only in the last year that they were converging to become my day job. First off was in an izakaya in Japan in 2015, where an evangelist installed the ID on my phone and sent over some of these magical internet monies, which I wasn't quite sure what it was. Started reading up a bit about it, but didn't get bitten by the Bitcoin bug just quite yet. But when it started to become a bit more complex and fascinating in 2017 with the ICO boom and many new, not just currencies, but other types of software was started to be written on the blockchain, or at the very least promises of software in the form of white papers. Then I started to go a little bit deeper, even actually started to work on a type of DAO with rule-based deal sourcing, due diligence, and also post follow-up system. But as the ICO boom became a bust, I continued my day job, which at the time was at Spotify. So I was working with expansion work over at Spotify. And that's also brought me into Japan, where I spent a long time, and a bunch of other countries that we launched in as well.
Real quickly, did you say Spotify?
Yeah.
What were you doing at Spotify? I couldn't hear you.
Global expansion, launching new countries.
Oh, nice. So that's why you were hopping around the world.
That's how I was hopping around the world.
That's
One
awesome.
day Israel, the next day India, the next day in Japan.
What was that entailing for you? Were you like staffing up, building up, doing promotions? What kind of things are you required to or responsible for?
So first off, triaging the world. What are the parameters that indicate where you should go? Where should we actually launch next? And then building up the plan for the markets, which meant also going to the markets and finding initial teams. So the couple of dependencies for music service, some of them overlapping with finance, some of them very different. It's a licensed environment, but it's not a financial license you get. It's a licensed content from the labels and the license holders, publishers and societies. And so getting in place local licensing, local ad sales, because Spotify is a ad supported service, and then various kind of distribution partnerships. So a mix of both hiring local people to do that, as well as putting in place the initial playbooks for doing it.
That's interesting because I would assume that a lot of people assume Spotify is this virtual business, probably make this assumption that all of the music and advertising is somehow centralized or able to be aggregated through one or more sources locally or something, and not realize that it's very much something that has to be localized. That's really interesting.
I think in the world of global versus local, on one end, you have the Instagram with 50 people launching a camera service that works across the whole world and very little need for local nuances. On the other end, you have probably something like Uber or a pizza chain,
Sure.
just super local and needs to have very local presence. Spotify is maybe not as far to the side of the pizza chain, but definitely further on that than a camera, because you do need to have the local content. And you need to have local licenses for global content in the case of some markets like Japan.
Sure. No, that's just something I think we all kind of skip over and don't think about. That's very cool. That must have been an exciting job. Were you involved in tech or the music industry prior to Spotify, or?
If we rewind even further, prior to doing music, I was marketing potato chips and diapers. So very different type of story. Prior to that, I was studying law for a while. And in parallel to that was when I had my initial dabbling in tech. I set up a couple of different companies, two in Singapore and two in Sweden. One which was a secondhand sales site called Sella, and another which was a night clubbing portal called CIA Clubbing in Asia, and then a local area network club in Sweden, and then a software development company where I was developing basically simple content management systems, CMSs for SMEs in Sweden.
Wow.
Different technical things, but no protocols at the time.
Yeah, but it sounds like you dabble in a lot of things simultaneously like me. That's very interesting.
Maybe I'll try a podcast in a couple of years.
Hey, you probably should. It's good for the brand, good for the brand, and good for the partner relationships. So you're at Spotify, and then at the same time, you're starting to dabble more and more into this. And you said you were creating a DAO at the time, right?
So the idea was having a framework for not only sourcing the funds, but also assessing performance of certain tokens. So the idea is that with tokens in market, you get a much faster gauge of a product's performance compared to in equity. So in normal equity, you have to wait many years before you start to see how market reacts to it. The secondary markets are not as liquid, which also means it takes a long time for an equity investor to see whether they're a good equity investor, because it takes time for your portfolio, your garden of flowers to become flowers. Or whereas in tokens, you get much faster a market reaction to how a product is performing, which has had both its good sides and its bad sides. You basically have products that are in a seed stage, but are being assessed like they're a public company when they're just trying to get the product market fit. But the idea there was that because of the liquidity and the fast assessment you get of products, you can also create a feedback loop that allows you to assess performance of the distributed network of investors. So the idea was basically that we have investors that make votes on different protocols that should be invested in. And then depending on how those then perform in the market, you can change the point allocation to the different investors so that you can iterate the allocation of capital in the DAO based on the actual performance of the portfolio.
That's awesome. And were the investors then, was that a system where the investors kind of their decisions to vote on certain things, were they rewarded in some way for picking those investments?
Exactly. So
Nice.
it's evolution of the DAO, the OG DAO, but going further into the lifespan of a fund and assessing performance assessment of the different participants in DAO. So judging not just on the basis of their vote in the DAO, as in their token holdings in the DAO, but also on the basis of actual performance.
And is that something that's still going, or is you've moved into this?
Then basically every single token went not up but down, and yeah, put that on ice and decided to keep on chugging away at my horrible day job launching music service across the world, which was quite okay. So I shouldn't complain. After which I started getting more and more interested in finance, though, getting more and more into finance. So as I was wrapping up at Spotify, I joined a new bank. So I then jumped on to Revolut, which is like a mobile neobank here in Europe and in the US as well, actually, which was proper in finance, but also again, like Spotify channeling the distribution of music, Revolut changing the distribution of financial services.
Sure.
So I did growth there, 50 shades of growth. So ranging from software things like brand and marketing to product flows, acquisition, AR funnel, and also market operations. It was
Wow.
a fun mixed bag, going more into the finance space, but still not fully in DeFi or crypto. Web3, I think is what we're calling it now. So yeah, that's the last pit stop before I eventually set up Growth Labs.
Are you full-time now, Gro?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah,
figured as much. Just I should
200%.
ask.
200%. Now this was a year ago, a year and a half
Okay.
ago actually. So then we assembled some of the team actually that I started to build the product within 2017. Some of them joined early on, and then we've been scaling up the team, and now we're about 15 people across a number of different countries.
Wow, that's amazing. What's interesting, I was just going to comment is you have this you have a lot of variation in the markets that you've worked in, but your skill set building and growing things allowed you to hop around. But it's interesting because more and more the people I run into in DeFi and the founders I talk to have these like really varied backgrounds and have been in multiple industries. Surprising number came from the legal industry, which is just odd to me how many have, but I just find that interesting. And it's funny because there are so many things that are changing. The DeFi, I think, will change in the real world in terms of organizational structure, DAOs, et cetera, finance, everything else. But the other thing I think it's changing is the meritocracy is changing how people get work. But I also think that variety of experience actually is becoming a strength, whereas it probably would have seen as a shot on the revenue to help been in multiple different industries for some industries in the past. So that's interesting to me.
Probably because it's a younger industry. No one has spent 20 years in DeFi, and so there's a kind of a shared base that is relatively fast to learn in this industry compared to many others because it is new, although it's increasing exponentially. Whereas in some other industry, you can literally there are hundreds of years to study up on them, depending which industry you pick.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's do this. Let's give us an overview of what Grow is, how did you come up with the idea, what it is, and then let's get into more about how it functions and what the value is for users and people that want to utilize the platform.
Sure. So the backdrop is summer 2020, yield farming and a bunch of protocols are launching the governance tokens. Crazy heyday. Yields are very crazy. And when you talk to people on the street about these numbers, they're like, wow, that is too crazy. So that
They
must
don't believe it.
Exactly. That must just be inefficiently priced risk, or it is efficiently priced risk and it's extremely risky. And so if you put anything more than your casino money in there, you're just being stupid. But playing around with it, it felt like there was an inaccurate pricing of that risk. There were a lot of people moving around capital, not being hit by some of the losses that have become known to wreck news, etc. So we were thinking about how we could offer people with a different risk profile, the ones who said, this is too risky for me, give them an option to get access to DeFi yields. So the design objective from a user point of view was a high yield savings account with deposit protection. How can you get yields like in DeFi, maybe a little bit lower, but with the protection that you're gotten used to from a normal bank? If you looked at the options in the market, you basically had to go to a Nexus Mutual or something like that and buy insurance a la carte, say how long you wanted it for, and pay extra for it. But that's not really how deposit protection works in TradFi. If you go to a bank and say, hey, take my $100 of deposit, the bank doesn't say, okay, for how long? And can you please pay us extra for the deposit protection? So protection at the time worked more like travel insurance or health insurance. And so what we then did was to look at some other ways of achieving that type of protection. So we looked at risk tranching. So what Gro Protocol is a risk tranching protocol that also optimizes yield. And in order to achieve that protection then for the safe side, we have a high risk side, which is taking on the risk on behalf of the low risk side. And in return for taking on that risk, gets higher yield. And so we have then what we call the leveraged vault, which is the high risk, high yield one. And we have the powered savings, or the powered stablecoin product, which is the protected and lower, albeit orders of magnitude higher than a 0% interest account. Infinite orders, it's zero. So that was the design objective, and that's the origin for why I decided to work on these two products: more yield and more risk, and less yield, but also less risk.
That's awesome. And when did you start building and when did you launch?
So we started to reassemble the team end of 2020, and we went into our first audits towards the Q2 that year. So that's 2021, then the year after. And then we launched in the summer of last year. So now it's a bit more than half a year, say 6-7 months ago. So it wants
Nice. And how has the response been?
It's been really cool. We have launched a number of different products. We've launched both the first core protocol, which has said high risk and low risk. We've launched that through some exciting partners. So if you go, for example, with Argent, whether that's on Ethereum L1 or with L2, so there's a Sync version, you can access the Vault product directly in there, which has had a lot of positive response. We then went on to launch the DAO. So there's now a decentralized autonomous organization around the protocol, which is a vibrant community of Gromies that are
Gromy?
involved in Gromies, exactly,
I like
that
it.
are involved in the road mapping and now more and more guidance in different aspects of the DAO and its treasury. So we have a G-Force, which is our decentralized marketing force that is doing
Wow.
a mixture of DAO ambassador activities, of content creation and broadcasting activities. And I say products we're launching because setting up a DAO and governance is in itself a product in this space, right?
Yeah.
To basically productize a lot of those workflows. And then the last thing we launched was Labs, which is our even higher yield offering on Avalanche. So one of the big requests from the DAO was get onto a cheaper chain than Ethereum L1. And so we launched our first other expansion besides Sync. We went to Avalanche and did Gro Labs on there, which is
Nice.
a managed LP. So if you're doing liquidity provision, so you're adding in liquidity into Uniswap. So in Avalanche, it's called Trader Joe, or one of them. It requires a lot of manual handling to not be overexposed to an asset, but Labs basically automates that for you. So you can get LP type of yields, but without the hassle of managing the exposure, short-long exposure.
So you have a range of products from the most conservative, the safest type products, all the way through to more higher risk plays for people that want to dabble. Do you find that, or do you know if that users of the platform mix it up when they use your platform, or do you find that they're conservative, aggressive as
Yeah.
they use the platform?
So our initial hypothesis was that it was one or the other. And then we had people who indeed said that, oh, okay, I'll do a mix. Or I'll do some in that and some in that and mix up the risk profile. So we indeed have that. Majority of users still one or the other, but it's like definitely like one overlap between the circles of people who use product in some kind of mix. We also, the products have various kinds of incentive programs attached to them. So you can use the assets into curve pool, for example. So there are some users that are quite heavy on using curve pools and appreciate that kind of utility. You can buy or sell powered stablecoin, the low risk product in a curve pool. That's one of another kind of sub user group within the different use categories.
And as you built this community out, did you find that, first of all, I think the DAOs and communities are always a difficult thing to build, but I would assume that for the most part, you probably have, I don't mean serious by emotionally serious, but you have a group probably that's a little more committed and serious based on the products that you guys have, people that are actually pretty committed to actually building something that's solid, representative in the market, and can bridge the gap into real world.
Yeah, there's definitely different degrees of contribution from different parts of the DAO. I think every DAO sees that and tries to figure out a good framework for involving them. It's interesting when there's a token involved, it changes a lot the dynamics of how people get involved, because all of a sudden there's some symbol associated with a protocol and organization beyond just the products.
Sure.
And many mix up as if the governance token is itself the product and the core protocol, but they obviously function independently of each other. And one is a governance token that's intended to help guide operations and progress of the protocol. But we have been experimenting with our operating models for how to involve decentralized stakeholders in the best way. I think the DAO phenomenon as a way to organize people is one which is still trying to find its true and most efficient shape.
Sure.
If you look at like corporate governance, where you have shareholders, boards, executive organs, and their various working groups throughout the company, have had hundreds of years of evolution and trial and error, finding out what works and what works less. And there are some pretty well-established practices across most jurisdictions for what works. DAOs have been around for 4 years, depending on how you count it. So it hasn't gone through as many iterations. Of course, everything moves much faster in today's day and age than it did for probably corporate governance evolution. And we can also learn, I think, from probably even more than we're doing today, of how corporate governance works, because it is in the zeitgeist that people are now picking up work more at their own conditions. We've had COVID accelerating that trend. People are already doing more gig work, gig economy, deciding when they want to work, where they want to work, Then COVID came, and for those who could have that optionality of choosing where to work, which now became more, have been able to embrace that. And those kind of phenomena, I think, are just making DAOs part of the zeitgeist. And then, of course, crypto on top of that is also in the zeitgeist. Now, figuring out how to best operate a decentralized organization, being able to tap into talent the right way and involving people, that is a challenge that I think every DAO is trying to figure out the form of. And there are many different practices for that, whether you work with committees or focus groups, action groups, or breakout teams, whatever your model calls for.
Do you think we'll end up somewhere between the experience of corporate governance and kind of the loose, chaotic nature of the initial DAOs? Do you think we're going to end up somewhere in the middle where these two models have merged?
I think the anonymity of much of DAO work and the lack of contractual relationships and the ease by which people move in and out of these organizations also calls for different types of frameworks on how to incentivize and engage participants in those organizations than in a traditional corporate environment where I'm an employee, I do 9 to 5, and because I'm at work, there's a relatively good chance that during those hours I'll be spending time working on this thing, and like clocking in time is pretty highly correlated with my actual output. Broad brushstrokes are exceptions to that as well. Whereas in a DAO, many people could participate in many different DAOs. Some people might be very effective and have a high output over a short period of time, and inversely, some people might not be so effective. So it becomes more important to look at what's actually happening and figure out how to build frameworks around that, because these are people who are anonymous and operating in different types of ways. So it's quite empowering for people that they can choose their own conditions, but it's also important that for organizations to figure out the right frameworks to involve people. And I think the same kind of, you see in a lot of tokenomics and crypto protocols building these almost game-like mechanics around how their products work. Present company not excluded from that. And so that's, you can see that trend is also then translating into the DAO world, where you're creating these crypto economic incentives on forms for people to participate and get involved in organizations.
Yeah, I wonder if we'll start having people specialize in community recruitment, not necessarily what we get now in terms of growth marketing or influencer recruitment, but actual like people teaming up to come in and help with projects that have a particular sets of skills that aren't necessarily going to become core team members or anything else. I think there's going to be a lot of evolution with where these things go, but yeah. In terms of launching the product, you guys actually have some fairly impressive investors initially. Was that difficult at the time that you were building, or were things pretty hyped up enough that with the concept you had and the background you had, did you find that was not as difficult as it may have been at another time?
Hard to relate in theory how it would be compared to another time, but we were very fortunate to meet some great investors who have been very helpful in many different ways and are providing not just money, but also great insights on various matters. I think when we fundraised, we ended up fundraising, not really intentionally, but then we started fundraising and there was an interest in what we were looking at doing. And then a round came together. Yeah. Happy with having them on board on the cap table, but also in the DAO and in participation protocol.
Well, I would say based on the list I'm looking at here, the level of advice and help you can get, as well as connections with those kinds of investors, is absolutely phenomenal. And I think for people that you're attracting in terms of users, that's something that really speaks volumes to the team you have and what you guys are building. So I think that makes a huge difference. Kinds of people that get attracted to utilizing your protocols.
There have been references to investors in the past. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. One of the things that I talk a lot about is I don't think there's going to be like this mass adoption with non-DeFi people. I think there's going to be the slow kind of bits and pieces that people that aren't necessarily ever going to be degenerate investors or people willing to put in the work, that you have to put in the work to understand what's happening in DeFi. Is there a place, is part of your kind of go forward strategy as well to figure out ways that you can partner into the real world or into traditional finance and bridge that gap and be an engine to the existing finance world?
Yeah, that was the backdrop for us wanting to do this in the beginning, in that we saw a need for certain value propositions in the people who are not yet in crypto to enable them to come over here, because there's now a larger diversity of risk preferences and risk profiles of people entering the space. Still today, though, if you go to our protocol, we have a couple of wallet integrations, but those wallet integrations generally require you to know how to create a wallet, whether it's software or hardware, write down your keywords and figure out where to get stable coins and that whole. And we're not doing any hand holding of that. We are working with great partners who are taking on that as one of the big challenges, like Argent, right? Which see that as an important part of opening up the ecosystem to more people and facilitating those very important first steps, account creation or wallet creation, and then getting on board there. I think we're just getting started in that front. There's still a lot that can be done on that. Many things are just getting started. Still cost way too much to get your assets into. If you want to top up your neobank wallet, you wouldn't really be okay with spending 3% to top it up. But we're still expected to pay 3% when we're topping up our crypto wallet. And of course, there are ways around that, but in general, I think that needs to become more widely distributed and more accessible for more people, so that most people's journey into DeFi is like their first journey into a neobank, where their first reaction is not, what are all these acronyms and what is this? But rather, whoa, I did this in 5 minutes. Awesome. Which is pretty much the reaction you get from people when they set up their neobank account for the first time.
Yeah, no, I think that makes complete sense. And I would assume with the model of what your product provides, that you are very likely to have a first focus strategically, or not first focus, but a later focus strategically into kind of integrations into some of those other platforms. And I think the approach that you guys have taken means that some of the other neobanks and some of the other financial providers are probably going to be more interested in partnering with someone like you with kind of a more conservative approach in some ways to some of the products, because they'll feel safer about their users onboarding. I'm not even sure we're even there close to there yet, but I think products like yours have a better chance.
So I think that's just not if, but when. There's already the more progressive of the neobanks are taking steps in that direction and having crypto as part of their product offering, but it's still DeFi crypto. And there are now more players that also starting to integrate DeFi, but not the big players yet. But once that does start to happen, yeah, I think it's slowly and then quickly.
Did you see a surge in, my assumption has been, is when there are more conservative products in the market, that when the bear market comes, a lot of people are saying, let me dive into things that are a little more conservative and safer or protected. Did you guys see a growth period when the rest of the market was collapsing? Not collapsing, dumping.
Collapsing is strong. We're in a bull market now, right? We've seen a shift in the ratio more towards the low risk powered savings product. Yes, we have indeed. But the nature of whether it's either of the sides of the protocol and the strategies underneath are market neutral strategies, right? So they're not really dependent on either a bear or a bull market. Basically, reliant on the traditional components of yield generation in DeFi, which is lending income, market making income, and then various kinds of token incentives. And that needs some activity. It can be downwards activity, it can be upwards activity. Just completely the market is not fun.
I didn't catch that last part. What'd you say?
A completely dead market is not fun for anyone.
No, of course not.
Some action, and then that generates yield.
Yeah, like I said, I could just see that more people would probably run to these two more conservative options at this point. I think we all do. We all get a little gun shy and say, okay.
The market is going down, but not just, you don't have to go to just the lowest product, go to the highest product as well, because it's also generating high yield in a bear market. But it's a great place to park your stables while waiting for and then you can pull out and you can go all in on whichever volatile asset you prefer.
Yeah, well, look, the people who
not financial advice.
Show, what's that?
Not financial advice.
Yes, for the degens that listen to my lunch show, your entire spectrum of products would be a nice conservative for them for jumping in from labs all the way down to the other ones. People who have been out chasing 70,000% APY and then getting burned. This might be a good place for them to be parking. What kind of is the next phase for you guys? And are there things you can talk about that you guys are going to be doing next? When you guys call that product labs, is that something where you're going to be doing more testing of new products and that's where you start them and then run them out to the standard platform? Can you kind of give me an idea of what's coming?
Yeah. So labs is indeed a testing ground for new strategies. So the strategy that we have in there now is something we can roll into the core product. We just announced our roadmap and published our roadmap 2 weeks ago, which talks about the next couple of months, the things that we're working on. And two of the bigger bets on there, one of the bigger bets is what we call G squared. So Grow going broader and deeper. And so the next version of the Gro Protocol will be going even more multi-chain. So right now we are the core protocol on Ethereum L1 and zk. But we're going to go to more chains where gas is cheaper and have more strategies. So we think this is solid play for people who are not willing to pay quite as much for the transactions as they do have to do on Ethereum. We also see vibrant ecosystem on each of the chains now. So while the Ethereum transaction has been not going as fast the last half year, if you add on all the other chains that have been growing on top of that, yeah, you see an insane increase in transaction activity in the broader ecosystem. So more multi-chain work is working on, and also having new strategies in those chains, because all of the strategies that we have right now on Ethereum doesn't work on the other chains. So we're going to have new strategies as well.
All right. And I would assume that
More yield and safer.
that's good. And I would assume that coming onto other chains opens the door to smaller sized investors that probably you've had a basket of mostly larger investors who are willing to pay those fees to get the returns that are a little safer with what you guys offer. So how has the launch on Avalanche gone? Have you seen the community there start to come into what you guys are offering?
Yeah. We're just now doing also a partnership with the Lobster DAO, which is one of
Good.
these DeFi communities. It's an interesting one because it's a new type of approach to managed LP. So it's one that's been very lucrative, but also has some negative turns sometimes. So it's basically like more of it's not quite as neutral as market making in Curve or lending protocol, but yeah, has had some crazy returns across the last couple of months.
That's
And
great.
also something that we use ourselves heavily with our own treasury.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's true. I guess you can just plaque the treasury down in there. That's excellent. And how many people did you say you have on the team, on the core team?
15 people.
Nice. Very nice. I don't know if you hired outside for the designers or not, but the UI and the UX is really nice, really attractive. You guys have done really
I'll let Hayward is our head of design. I'll let him know that.
It's beautiful. Very attractive, very welcoming, nice branding, nice colors, keeps your attention. It's really well done.
Thanks.
So if, for you, do you expect Grow to become like a fully independent, decentralized organization someday? Or do you honest still want to be like guiding and strategizing the organization, say in 5 years from now?
I will keep on working with this for. Yeah, this will now be my life's work. But yeah, I'm here to build for a very long time. But already now there are plenty of things that I'm also not immediately involved in leading, which is fun to see. Treasury committee was just launched, and I saw in the Discord what they were proposing. So I'm like, okay, cool. So
Yeah, that's a
more
weird
work.
thing though. Yeah, I think that when you've raised money, you've built something, you have a vision, you're growing it, and then all of a sudden you start to hand it off to like really important things like treasury proposals off to a group of people. That's got to be a really interesting feeling to have that happen, but
Yeah.
also reduces your stress levels.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. There's definitely a lot of things that we're working on, a lot of things that we're doing, and myself included. So it's not for lack of interest that I wasn't involved in the treasury committee. It's just that we're busy building some other cool stuff that we're
Yeah.
launching. So
Yeah, and you can drive product while the community helps you drive some of the other things. I think I really like what the platform offers. I like how you guys are running it. And is there anything else we should know about Grow before we wrap it up?
just one-stop shop for your stable coins. Right now on 3 chains, but soon on more chains. Continue to deliver on that, basically.
Awesome.
An easy place to park your stables and know that it's generating yield.
Yeah, and I think it's a nice safe haven with some good earnings. So that's great. Do you know what chains you're going to next?
So we're quite EVM focused because that's where we've built our core protocol. Which of them we haven't announced it. We're doing a bit of triangulation between the different strategies we're going to use. And so some of the strategies can be used on some chains and some on other chains. So we won't do all of them at once, but I can't say which one right now.
Do you have to have people dedicated to managing and planning the strategies for each of the vaults?
So we have we literally have a product strategist that came on board a couple of weeks ago who is solely focused on this right now. So we'll drag on our Discord. Obviously working very closely with myself and the other team, but getting on board, and that's his dedicated focus.
Awesome. That's great.
And then we also hope, as we're decentralizing further, that we get more community contributors to the strategies as well, so that we have more independent contributions on strategies.
But again, I think that makes complete sense because there are people out there that have ideas and thoughts around things you guys can do in vaults you can deploy. That's interesting. Will it always be stables?
For now, yeah, we think that's also part of the position at the moment. Stablecoin maximalist to some regard, but never say never. But yeah,
That's good. That's good. All right. So at the end of every interview, I ask everybody that comes on the show a question. And that question is, in the DeFi crypto ecosystem, Is there a person or a project that you think is of critical importance or that you admire and look up to for what they're doing for the ecosystem?
Is it too fanboy to say Vitalik?
No, that's a common answer. And he'll probably be a more common answer because it used to be the most common answer was Andre Cronje. I don't think he'll be quite as much the common answer anymore. So yeah, no, it's not too much fun, boy. But why? There's the obvious reasons. But for you, what are your thoughts about Vitalik?
So one of the reasons I struggled to get really into crypto, or it took me a couple of years after discovering Bitcoin, was proof of work. I couldn't quite grok and accept that you were going to have to process mathematical puzzles and waste CPU cycles in order to secure a network. I understand it, but I couldn't quite appreciate it.
Right.
And I know we've had many years of proof of work also on Ethereum. But when I heard and read about proof of stake in 2017 and thought it was going to launch in 2018, that just got me really excited, because now it felt like there was an elegant solution to solving security. And so that was what made me become really interested in the space, the internet machine with an efficient way to solve consensus. Yeah, that's, I guess, as a thank you for bringing me into the space, basically.
That's excellent. Honest, I really appreciate you joining me. I'm looking forward to getting this episode out, and I'm looking forward to seeing the response to people finding out about what Grow is and what it can do for them. I'll definitely be talking you up on my Let's show as well, because it sounds like a great product, a great team, and I think you guys are on an excellent path.
Great. Thanks, Jared.
Thanks, man. Appreciate your time.